E então, como convidado, passo agora a palavra à Susan Flocken para o primeiro contributo para a nossa discussão. Obrigada.
Thank you. So I will be speaking in English. So it'll be now maybe the other half of this room putting on their headphones. Although I know that here in Portugal you are very language thing, so you maybe not need your headphones. So I think can I first congratulate you on the topic that you've chosen for this seminar, because I think this is the basis of what we need to discuss, and especially that we need to discuss as education trade unions. Quality education, this is definitely something that it has to be on the agenda of every social dialogue. And that has to be on the agenda for us as education trade unions to form the debate about this. For us to set the priorities, what do we want to discuss if we're discussing about quality education, and in particular if we're discussing about publicly funded education. And I think bringing a European perspective into this debate, based now on what we heard, what is the situation in Portugal, and what of course the colleagues here you are aware of in FEMPROF what the situation is. This is always something that we in the European sectoral social dialogue, when we talk with the employers, the European Federation of Education Employers, we have on the agenda as well, quality, but of course there is a different approach to quality. What we, in the run-up to the European Parliament elections, have said that we need as education trade unions to put forward when we discuss about quality education is, of course, the teachers, teaching staff. If you want to have quality education, you need to base it on quality teachers. And what do we need if we want to have quality teachers? We need quality training for the teachers to be prepared to do their job. But we also need the appropriate funding that goes with it. And it is appalling to see in Europe that governments, education ministers, but also heads of state have made a commitment to education, to put education as a priority for the European Union, for their countries. That was at the Gothenburg summit with the European education area that was being created. But also when we hear about the programs like the excellence networks of excellence universities and other initiatives, that there is a willingness to put education at the forefront, but we do not see the true commitment with it, which means also bringing the funding, the public funding behind that to make it a true commitment. So for us that is one of the most important points really, that we see this true commitment, and that we as education unions, we demand this commitment. And I know that there has been a long debate, and you mentioned this also here in particular, fight and struggle here in Portugal to say, if the crisis is past, if we're overcoming the crisis, we need to see that also reflected in the salaries of our teachers. This has to be reflected there. And so this is a very, very important point. And also if we talk about education, why is it so important? Because education is the means to lift people out of poverty, and there's so many studies that support that. We have European studies, but also at the international level, of course, the OECD, they provide the data that give that proof. So that is also why in Europe we see a strong drive for inclusion. Education is a right. It is not, it is a right, it's a public good. And so there should not be a discussion about who can afford education and who cannot afford education. Access to quality education for all must be the basis. And so this links again to what I mentioned just now about public investment in education and the true commitment. But it also links, of course, to our discussion and the acceptance of education trade unions as professionals, as the professional voice. and not only as the voice to discuss on working conditions, and one of the issues was mentioned, or several issues actually you brought up in your presentation when we talk about working time. And I think that's a very important discussion that we need to lead at the moment, with all the new technology coming into education, expectations being there, maybe for teachers not only to be in school in the morning to teach, but also in the evening to reply to questions from the school leaders, to questions from parents. There's an important discussion to lead. But also when we talk about important prevention concerning burnout, concerning the prevention of psychosocial risks, these are things where we as education trade unions are really those who should form the debate on it and should put our points forward. But also the other part, which is about the content, the profession. As teachers, we are the ones who know how to best approach the topics in class. Yes, there's a curriculum, but how to implement that is the professional autonomy of the teacher. And if we talk about higher education, we would call it the academic freedom. But this is crucial, that these are respected, the academic freedom, the professional autonomy of the teachers. And why is this so crucial to speak about this at this moment? And I think with so many different countries also here represented in this room, we're very well aware of the shift that we see not only in Europe, but also at international level, towards right-wing, nationalist, but also populist movements at the moment across the globe. Maybe started, we could say, with Trump, but also continued throughout other countries. And this is an important topic as teachers. We have the right to address the topic, the content of education, that the subject that we're teaching in the way that fits best the students. And it cannot be that governments tell the teachers what or how to teach. The autonomy of the teacher, the academic freedom is very important. So I've made a stance for quality education. I've been talking about the importance of public investment, the importance of social dialogue, which is a very, very difficult construct in some countries, but it is also a very important construct. And at least from speaking from a European perspective, there's a commitment to the dialogue, to social dialogue. But I know, and we all know, how difficult it is in practice to be accepted as the partner when it comes to education issues. Knowing also that very often it can be the case that we negotiate within the education context, and then the next step is the government says, now this has to go to the finance minister. And the finance minister then says, this is the line, this is going to be difficult, and this is not going to work. So it's so important that we take into account all the different stakeholders, and that we bring also these stakeholders together to the table. But the dialogue is the instrument to go forward, and it's very clear for us that that is the first step. And every other step that we take when we go out in the streets or we go on strike, that this is an ultimate level that we take, because we have used all the different instruments of dialogue. So what we really need also in education is what you mentioned very clearly, the respect. And I would say not only the respect for the profession, but also the respect for us as social partners, as a partner, and not a foe, to use a word, but to see the dialogue as a partnership, where we put the things on the table to debate, and where we actually have a meaningful and a constructive dialogue. We want to find common ground and common achievements. And then I would like to make a fourth point very important, which I started to mention already, but this is about citizenship education. Because I think young people now take very often things for granted, and we also start to take things for granted. For example, equality and gender equality. But we have to be aware the education profession is a profession where now we see more and more women actually who work in the sector. And there are differences as we go through the different education sectors, say. There's a very high percentage in early childhood education, and then it gradually decreases as we go up in the level of education as we come to higher education. But these are topics that we as unions or past generations have fought for, and we mustn't lose these. And these are topics that we need to keep on the agenda. So it's about equality, gender equality, it is about inclusion. It doesn't matter what background pupils have, but it should also not matter what background teachers have to be teaching in a class. We need this diversity, not only amongst the pupils, but also amongst the teachers. And especially, as I mentioned earlier, in this time that we face in Europe and in the world in general. So I'm making the stance for those 4 points. I've also brought some flyers and leaflets with me from the campaign that we run, in particular also with the support of you, on shaping the future of Europe with teachers, and we formulated our 4 key demands. So this is the flyer. Maybe you can pass it around, or you can also go onto our website and find it there. These 4 key demands are valid beyond the European Parliament elections, beyond the elections that are going to happen here. But you can use them for the elections. You can put your points up to the government and ask them to commit to them, to the Parliament, to the parliamentarians, to commit to education and to the education trade unions as rightful and respected social partners. So I would like to put those 4 points in the bowl and mention one last and important topic, which I do hope we're going to discuss here as well. And that is maybe not so easy. It's a challenge to discuss, but I think it's an important question that we need to ask ourselves. When we're talking about the future of Europe, I think we also need to talk about the future of the profession and the future of the unions. What are the key points, the key priorities as unions to remain attractive, to retain our membership, to recruit young people into our organizations, and for those who are part of our organizations to be active and to engage them? I think these are very crucial questions that we need to ask ourselves also when we're talking about the debate of quality education and public funding in education. Also is the role of education trade unions, and what do we need to do in order to appeal to people. And a point that also you mentioned earlier in your presentation, Manuela, about the media and the perception of unions in the media. And that is very much linked to that. How do we present ourselves in society? How are we reflected in society? And the challenge is what can we do? What can we contribute to that? So now I've put a lot of questions on the table. I will stop talking here because I look very much forward to this discussion. Thank you very much.